Hi guys, in this video I want to talk a bit about ARM template, Azure Resource Manager template, and give you a bit of information about why we need ARM template and what's the easiest and quickest way for creating a new project using Visual Studio and deploy ARM template to Azure. Let's get started. I start with the first question: what is the ARM template and why we need ARM template? So if you are familiar with Azure, for creating different resources in Azure, there are a couple of different ways. Probably the easiest way is going to Azure portal and using a web graphical user interface for creating your resources. That resource might be a storage account, service bus, key vault, or virtual machine, or whatever you are after. So let's just have a look at the portal. If you log into portal.azure.com, you can create a resource group. I already created test resource group here, and I want to use the web interface for creating a storage account for this demo, and then do the same thing using ARM template. But before doing that, if you want to know more about the ARM templates, if you just search ARM template reference in Google, you've got Azure Resource Manager template reference. And there is a bunch of different links here for different things about ARM templates. So there is a tutorial for creating and deploying your first ARM template and deploying and managing resources in Azure by using ARM templates. So there's a full documentation here in Microsoft website. But if you want to save some time and watch this video to quickly get your head around how you can deploy ARM templates, just watch the video to the end. Okay, let's go to the portal. I want to create a storage account in portal using web interface first. So I click on the add button and marketplace. Search for a storage account. Click create. It needs a bunch of different parameters when you want to create a storage account. I just put in some mandatory values here and accept all defaults for the other fields. So we need a name for this storage account. So let's put in ST for storage, ACC for account, test. And it says this name is already taken, so I added one at the end, and now it's okay. Then you need to choose the region that you want to create your resource. I want to create that in Australia Southeast, and I accept all other parameters with the default values, but based on your requirement, you need to set the proper values for these parameters, because it's very important what you are choosing here. For example, this redundancy might have different values, like local redundant storage or geo-redundant storage or other type of storage account. Based on your requirement, you need to pick up one of these, but for demo, just use local redundant. And just click on review and create. Validation passed. And by clicking on create, creates the storage account for us. So what the portal is basically doing behind the scene, there is an API for provisioning different resources in Azure. When we use web interface for creating a storage account, there is an API method for that. And this web interface is passing all the parameters that we set for the storage account to that API, and that API is creating the resource for us. Once it's ready, you can click on Go to Resource, and here you go. The storage account is created. It's an empty storage account. Okay, as I said, there are a couple of different ways for creating resources in Azure. One way is web user interface, and you can use Azure CLI or PowerShell script, and ARM template is one of the most popular one, because using Azure ARM template or Resource Manager template, you can source control your code, and it's very nice and clean, and you can use Visual Studio for deploying and maintaining your code. So let's go to the Visual Studio and create an ARM template project. You go to Visual Studio, click on New, and then Project. The project type that you need to pick up is Azure Resource Group. So if you type in Azure here, Azure Resource Group will come up, and in the description you have this is to provision Azure resources using Azure Resource Manager that will create an environment for your application. So that's the template that we need. Click Next. Give it a meaningful name. I put in ARM demo, and give it a location on your computer, your solution name, and click on Create. In the next screen, it's asking for the default template. There's a bunch of different templates here you can pick up. It's a built-in template like a Logic app, or if you are deploying a virtual machine, or you want to deploy a web application or a web application and a SQL database. For all those sort of things, there is a built-in template, and you can use that as a starting point. But for this case, we use blank template, and click on OK. Alrighty, the project is created. We've got 3 different files here. I start with the Azure deploy file. This is the main file that you write your code and your ARM template here. The second file is Azure deploy.parameters. If you have any parameters, you put your parameters here. And the third file is a PowerShell script, which is used for deploying your ARM template to the Azure. So let's start with the Azure deploy.json. And just bear in mind that this is just the name, Azure deploy and Azure deploy parameter. You can rename these files to whatever you like. Let's just do this. I want to rename it to storage account ARM. and rename the parameter file to the same thing, storage account ARM. All right, let's go back to on template file. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 main parts in the template project. The first part is parameters. You define your parameters here. If there is any parameter, there's a variable section. In variable section, you can define a variable and then reuse that variable in your resource section. And in the in resources section, you write your resource deployment code, and it's responsible for deploying that resource. Let's say a virtual machine, or in this case, a storage account. But the question is how you can find the sample code for each of these resources. The answer is very easy. If you go to Google and search for template storage account, because we are after a storage account template. The first link on the Microsoft documentation website. There's a JSON file. Yeah, you can see here. And it's a full list of different parameters that you need to set for deploying a storage account. It says name is a string. You can put whatever you want. The type needs to be Microsoft.storage/storage accounts. API version needs to be this value. SKU is for the pricing tier, and etc. So if you want to have a full list of different parameters that you need, you can refer to this document. But if you want to have a simple sample, if you look at this link, which is a GitHub link, and click on Azure Deploy JSON, there's a JSON template. It's a sample template for deploying a storage account. So what I want to do is just copying the resource section and then paste it to the Visual Studio resource area. Put that there. Let's just put name on top. And okay, now we have a sample code. We just need to customize it based on our requirement and what we need. The first thing that we need to pass to the storage account template is the name of the storage account. So what I want to do is defining a variable here, storage account name, and give it a name, st for storage account test and 1, 2. Type, as I said, needs to be Microsoft.storage/storage accounts. API version needs to be this. And as I said earlier, when you create a resource in Azure, behind the scene an API is called. That API can be called from Azure CLI, PowerShell script, ARM template, or when you are doing something on the web interface. So all that stuff is calling that API, and this API version is telling the Azure that you need to use this version of API for the storage account provisioning process. Location is the region that you want to create your resourcing. In this case, we can just replace it with resource group location. So I want to inherit the location from resource group. So if I resource group and dot location, what it does, it's putting the resource group location for the storage account location as well. In the SKU, we need to set a name and a tier. So in a name, I'm gonna put a standard LRS for local redundant storage account, and for tier, use the standard. It's optional, but it's more readable to have tier as well, because when you use a standard underscore LRS, it's obvious that the tier is a standard, but yeah, just to be more specific, I add that tier as well. Kind needs to be a storage v2, and in properties, we don't want to set anything, but as I mentioned earlier, if you have a specific parameters that you need to set for this storage account, some of them go to the properties section. Okay, let's save the template and deploy it to Azure. When you want to deploy that, again, there's a couple of different ways. One way is opening up a PowerShell window and calling this PowerShell script file, passing some parameters to that, and deploy this ARM template to Azure. Another way, which is the easiest, probably the easiest way, is using Visual Studio graphical interface for deploying your ARM template project. So if you right click on the project, there is a deploy option, and you can click on new. You need to use your Microsoft account to log into your tenant. Then you need to pick up your subscription and the resource group that you want to deploy this resource to. Then we've got two different fields here. The first one is the deployment template. The deployment template is the storage account ARM JSON, and the second section is of the parameter file. In this case, we have no parameters, but I still need to provide the parameter file, which is an empty file. And if I click deploy, the deployment gets started, and it creates a new storage account in the test RG resource group, and we can check it in the Azure. You see different messages in the output window. If you look at here, there is a template valid message in the output window. It means that the validation is passed, so the template structure and code is valid, and it's deploying the storage account at the moment. You need to wait for the deployment to finish. And then if we see this message, successfully deployed, we can go to the Azure portal and check for the storage account creation. So go back to resource group and test RG resource group. Here you go. Got SD test 1, 2. And it's created using the ARM template. Okay, nice and easy. Let's just quickly, before finishing this video, going back to ARM template code and use a parameter file for passing the storage account name as a parameter. So if I go back to the parameter file, I can create a parameter here. Let's name it storage account name. And give it a value. SD, whatever was here, we can just cut it and bring it here. Now in the parameter section, we need to define that parameter as well. So say storage account name, and we specify the type of parameter, which is a string in this case. And then here in the variable, instead of setting that as a hard-coded value, we use parameters and then parameter name. So what it does basically is grabbing the value of the storage account name parameter and set it to a storage account name as a variable. And here we can use that variable, or we can use the parameters storage account name straight away here in the resource section. Let's just redeploy the project and make sure that it's still working. This time, if you click on the edit parameters, you see that parameter name here, and you can change the value if you want and then save it. But we are happy with the name, so we just deploy it. The parameter file is very useful when you want to parameterize your ARM template for different environments. So let's say you want to name your storage account in dev environment stdev, for example, in test environment sttest, and in prod stprod. This way you can create just different parameter files with different value, add that parameters file in your deployment pipeline, and use the same template for deploying all the environments. The deployment was successful. We go back to the resource group. We see that sdtest 12 is still there, and this time we use the parameter file for specifying the name of the storage account. That's very easy to use ARM template. Just need to find the write template and write sample code based on your requirement, and then you can customize that easily. Just one more time, parameter section is for defining your parameter. If you want to put different parameters based on different environment that you have. Variable section is for declaring your variables and using them in your resource section. And in the resource section, you put your resource deployment code. In this case, it's a storage account. So if we have more more resources that you want to deploy, you can put all that codes in the resources section. And output section is for returning something from this template. So let's say when we are creating this storage account, this storage account template is called by a parent template, and that parent template needs to have the storage account connection string or a storage account name. For that purpose, we can use the output section and return the storage account name or storage account connection string in the output section. Then the caller or the parent template can use that return value in its code. Thanks for watching this video. Hopefully it's useful to quickly jump on the ARM template projects. Thank you.